There's also decoration that you can do on top of the running stitch. So this one's called a whipped running stitch, and the idea is that the thread is whipped through these gaps in between. So start your thread in exactly the same way we did with this running stitch. So cut it your arm's length and tie a couple of knots in the end. And then I'm going to start over here, but I'm finishing off. So you want to start just inside one of your running stitches. So I'm starting just inside here, and I'm going to pull my thread up. Sorry, as I knocked my camera out of the way then. And then what you want to do is pass the needle from the inside of your shape under that running stitch. Don't go through the fabric. You're literally just passing it under the stitch, and then you're pulling it out the other side. And then you're going to do the same on the next stitch. So you go from the inside under your running stitch, taking care not to catch the fabric. So I'm going under, and then I'm just going to pull it through. And you can see here how it's kind of whipped over. So you just keep repeating that. So you go from the inside out. Now you just want to remember that you'll keep going, keep stitching from the inside of your shape through to the outside of your shape. And make sure that you don't catch any of the fibres, because you just want to pass it under. So when I'm getting to this corner here, I'm going to pass it under that thread and pull it through, and then you simply just change directions. So we were going up this way, now we're going to go that way, but you're still passing it from the inside out. And if you're not doing a star shape, if you're doing any other sort of shape, just make sure that goes around properly. If you're doing any other sort of design, maybe you want to do a name or a floral design or just a straight line to do a sampler, that's absolutely fine. The key thing you just want to make sure you're doing is that you're following the same direction each time. So you're kind of going under from the bottom upwards and pushing it through. And if you keep catching the fabric as you're trying to pass it under, the other thing I would suggest doing is rather than the sharp bit of the needle, if you use this blunt bit of the needle, and if you pass that under, that shouldn't catch the fabric, and still pulling it all the way through. And I think because that bit isn't as sharp as the point, and don't worry if your thread kind of twists, it'll just kind of add to the natural shape that you're creating. And then so I'm going to get round to where you started. And as you can see, I'm kind of using both hands, but you can use one hand or both hands or whatever works best for you. I really think it's about finding the way kind of that you enjoy doing and which feels more natural for you. So when you do your last one, so I've done my last one here, and you can see that actually unless I go through that first one again, I'm going to end up with a gap in the stitch. So I'm going to go, this is where I started, and I've gone through both of them. I'm going to go through a second time on that first bar, pull it through, and it's just created that final join. And then what you're going to do is just take a stitch down through the fabric now. So we didn't go through the fabric on any of this, you were literally whipping the stitch over the fabric, over the threads, and then you just go down and tie a knot in it like we did when we did the running stitch. And the other option for embellishing the running stitch, we looked at the whipped stitch over the running stitch. This one's a woven stitch, so rather than going from the inside outwards each time, you're going to alternate. So you go from the inside out and then the outside in, so kind of weaving in and out the fabric. So I'm just going to finish off this and then you can kind of see it in action. And I've used a variegated thread, and you can see here how there's a really gentle change in the colours, and that can look really nice when you're doing this woven effect. So if you're starting from the start, then obviously you tie a couple of knots and then you thread and start it exactly the same way that we did with this running stitch. And what you can do is you come up from the back of your work and come up just before your stitch, and you then go under from the inside to the out. So I'll do that here. So I'm going under that stitch but not through the fabric and pulling it through. And now, rather than continuing by going in, out, I'm going to go out, in. So start to create like a looped effect. And you can leave a bigger loop here if you wanted to. You can kind of make a feature out of it. You may need to put like a little anchor stitch, just a teeny tiny stitch to hold it in place. I'm going to pull mine tighter because I kind of like this really subtle curved effect that it's creating. So I've gone inwards out, outwards in, and now I'm going inwards out again. And then you just keep repeating that process of alternating between in and out, and then out and in. And again, it obviously depends on the shape you're doing. If you're just doing a straight line, then you're kind of going up and down each time. Just take care not to catch the fabric, so you can use the blunt end of the needle if that helps. And then up here, so I've just gone from the inside to the out, so now it's almost going to loop round and come in. And you see here that I'm going to have to be really, really careful, because otherwise I'm going to end up catching the loop here. So I'm just going to push it through slightly at an angle there, just to kind of make it slightly easier, and then pull it through. You can see there that it's just kind of created that curve effect. And then if you pull it too tight, you can see it's starting to pull the shapes down. And then what you can do is you can just use your needle, kind of tease it back out again, and then just pull it to the place that you want it to be. So it's quite a forgiving stitch in that, you know, you don't have to unpick anything. If you've pulled it slightly too tight, you can just use your needle to ease it out. And you can really get lost in that rhythm again of going outwards, inwards, and then inwards, outwards. And then what I'm going to do here, so you can see this where I started. I came up just before the green stitch and then went under. So because I went inwards, outwards, this one would go outwards, inwards. But what I'm actually going to do is just take a stitch down here. So where I started, it's going to look like it joined up exactly there. And then if you see, if you've used two strands of thread and it starts to come apart, then you can just tease it back out with your needle. So that's two options that you can use for embellishing your running stitch. We did the whipped stitch over here, and we did the woven running stitch over here. You could just do running stitch on its own as it is here, and that looks really great. You could use a variegated thread here, which it's exactly the same stitch here, it's just running stitch, but because the thread changes colour naturally, it kind of gives it more of a movement. You could do multiple layers of running stitch here. So I did 3 different rounds of running stitch, and you could alternate, whereas I said kind of keep your stitches even, you don't have to at all. So I kind of alternated between doing larger running stitches and then smaller stitches in between, and that can kind of give it a really fun, different visual effect to it. So I just wanted to show you a couple of other ways you can use running stitch. This was just using 2 layers of a really soft fabric, muslin fabric, and I used running stitch, and I just went round in circles and kept going in circles until it reached in the middle and kind of create a really nice ripple effect. And I used different colours kind of go to create this design. You could also use it if you had a fabric which already had a design on, whether you printed it yourself or you've bought it with the design on, and you can use running stitch to kind of outline it and to give it a different element. So I used the running stitch here, and then I also used that whipped running stitch to create another effect all the way around it. Another option is that you can use it as a filler. So I had this flower design, I wanted to give it a bit of depth, so I added running stitch to it in different colour threads, and it kind of creates a different 3D effect. Or you could also, I used a whole load of fabric offcuts that I had and layered it again onto this thinner piece of cotton backing, and I just did lots and lots of running stitch to kind of hold all these layers together, but to create that kind of woven rippled effect with it. So there's lots of options here. So running stitch works really beautifully kind of to hold different layers together, or you can use it as an embroidery design in and of itself. So have a go, have a play, and kind of see where your creativity takes you.